Start recording on audio, and we'll sync them up with a big. Okay, hopefully that works.
All right. Alyssa's
Oh,
off to make.
already started recording. Self-soothe a bit. What's happening? Um, what is happening? I decided that after finishing UGO, I would build the Kickstarter page up so that it actually looked like something worthwhile, so that it was finished product. Um, Clear the head, clear the mind. Basically, what I decided to do was record a revisionist history of what Eric Westerlund looked like 3 years ago when he started this big thing. I have no idea. I feel like it's uh, going to be a touch cringy. Um, Let me start over real quick. Um, yeah, I decided to record a. Uh, we're just going to go back and look at what I was like 3 years ago and see what sort of answers I was giving to the questions that everyone provided for me, and try to match those up against after the trials of actually finishing um, what was true and what wasn't. I suspect it'll be something like a time capsule in maybe the worst ways, but um, part of writing is revision. Part of growing is revision. So seeing oneself again in the way that modern technology has allowed us to do is certainly a way to at least close the circle on what was a long project that I hope changed me somewhat. Um, the book is done and printed as a general update. There's about 98 copies left, about, because there's a number of copies that they sent me that were not up to snuff, whether it was because the slipcase was busted or the um, that's mostly it. There were a few of the books themselves didn't have a slipcase, and they Friesens, being they, didn't match up the number of slipcases to the number of books. So regardless, this is a lot of meandering on, but this is sort of my farewell to this project. I won't be updating this anymore, so this will be a last goodbye to the UGO project on the whole. It was a really good one. Uh, just psyching myself out by staring at you straight on. Anyway, let's go back and take a look at what those questions were like, and maybe provide a little bit more of an understanding of what happened along the way as I created the book. Um, yeah, let's have a watch.
Make banana bread. Um, Recording answers to questions from friends who were willing to ask me the questions that I need to explain to you who I am. My name is Eric. I'm a writer. I have been a writer ever since I. There were two stories that started off. One was a story about ants building a small castle in a watermelon, and the other was a story about Bob the lobster head character. I forget what he was doing. He was a mutant and he was found by a small boy on a dock. Anyway, Clay Evans, who was the newspaper columnist for the Daily Camera in Boulder, Colorado, was my mentor back in second grade, and I went and showed him Bob the Lobster. I can't say that I've been writing actively since then. I always write, and I always have wanted to be a writer, but it's taken a series of discouraging moments and encouraging moments to ultimately produce someone who's willing to actually make a book.
Speaking about yourself in the third person is one of the most difficult things about recording. uh, it's also like my manner of speech. It's incredible how much it bugs me. It's like I have to fill every moment with words, but not to make this too self-conscious. Uh, Clay Evans was not a mentor for a long period of time. He was just assigned to me after I was in a English class and had written a story, the lobster story. The ant story was it was in a watermelon shaped set of papers. I probably uh, ended up. I think I wrote that when I was like 6 or something. It was in elementary school in um, Eisenhower Elementary. No idea how good it was.
Um, my book is called UGO. It's a story about a boy man who
Boy.
is at once a pilgrim and a dunce, uh, who is forced from his home in some capacity, not Lion King forced from his home by the evil uncle, but Ugo causes harm at home, and when he does so, he's forced from his home
uh,
in search of whatever we all go in search of when we leave the house.
that was what I hoped was going to happen. Was Ugo caused an issue at home? He it a lot of this book ended up being about the question of what forces somebody from their home. Not the book itself, but a lot of the um, like all my thinking around setting up the book. So the every time I approached it, I had to find a way to get Ugo out of his town. And initially, I was just going to have him be told that he needed to leave by his wife and his parents. And the first couple times that I wrote it, that was the case. He had a baby that was coming, and he wasn't making any money. And there were better jobs in the city, and he should go get those jobs. And that ended up being a useless scenario because I've never had a baby, and I've never been told that I needed to go someplace by other people. I just have left places and always wondered, why do I end up leaving? Why do I get tired of something? Why do I get bored of a certain place? Why do I feel I want to go somewhere other than where I am? And Ugo was that opportunity. I mean, his name is literally UGO, UGO. That wasn't so much deliberate. Like, it may seem deliberate, but the more I've written his name down, obviously the more meaning it's picked up. But the process of getting him out of town was the hardest part because the first 3 or 4 approaches that I took to it, he always felt out of gas by about 50 or 60 pages. He's walking through the woods trying to get to the city, and he's giving an internal monologue that really doesn't have any sustenance because he didn't need to leave in the first place as a character. His psychology, his setup, everything. There's no reason, and it hadn't been considered. He left because I told him to leave. And as soon as I stepped in as author and said, "You're going to do this," to the character, he went, but you could tell that it was under false construction, and so he became a flimsy character very quickly. All this to say that the idea that he left because he caused harm is not actually true to the narrative anymore. Um, I'm not sure that when he leaves, he knows why he leaves. I mean, he has reasons to go, but he doesn't express them exactly. And he has a couple of reasons why he could leave, and I think they culminate in him leaving. But I think that was an important realization for me to make, was that while the demand on the writer is always to have a reason for doing what they do, that doesn't necessarily mean that the reason has to be cut and dry. Nor do I really believe that so much anymore. You know, you hear authors talking about the fact that they need to that there's one way to write, essentially. And I think that the more I've spent time with UGO and grown comfortable with the idea that this story is done, the more I've reckoned with the kind of cliche thing that you really want your characters to be alive and you really want to follow them in some way. There's 100 different things I could talk about in regards to how to do that, and I'm not necessarily sure that I know well enough to dictate, nor based on what I just said about authors telling you how to do something, should I even bother trying to do that. But I will say that being with Ugo and leaving town, it was more about waiting for him to be ready to leave. And I think that's why the beginning of the book is as slow as it is because Ugo's never been ready to leave, just like I've never really been ready to finish the book.
When we leave the nest. Um, Regardless, however, with that introduction out of the way, I just wanted to answer these questions as directed from close friends who I find to be incredibly funny people, in an effort to give you an idea of what you can expect from, if nothing else, what comes from my personality. It may not all be in the story, but it's a start. So, without ado,
I look like my
Chad
little cousins
from Nicaragua sent
now.
me the following 5 or 7 questions, depending on how you read. Number 1, do you live in a castle? I don't. I live on the 2nd floor of the Fairmont, which is an apartment building in Seattle. I've been to castles. I've written about castles. I love castles, kings, and all things related to medieval worlds, but I don't live in one. Number 2, where can you not take me? It's a question of imagination. Where can you not take me? I would suggest that it's not a place that I can't take you, but it's an amount of time. I don't think I can ever drive you, Chad, back to your center. I think you would have to do that. But I can ride alongside with you.
Sympathetic Eric, baby. Lover, baby. Make philosophical statements, baby. Center, wild world, baby. That was a dumb answer to that question. I'm so sorry for that. I don't know if it's a very good question either, but where can I not take you is like, yeah, that's just, I don't know. It's funny how you respond to witticisms with more clever mechanisms that don't actually have a lot of substance to them. Where can you take me? Where can you not take me? I guess any place that I haven't been, everything that I've constructed that, still a bad answer. Where can I not take you? I just believe that writing can go anywhere. I believe that it really is an opportunity to take what is essentially a kernel of the self and explode it out onto the page. So the feeling of, for instance, being in prison. I've never been in prison, and this is all leveraging Stephen Graham Jones' wisdom about how to empathize. But I've never been in prison, and yet I know a small version of prison, a very, very small version of prison, which is to say, what does it mean to be kept in the same room for a very long time? What does it mean to have the same available activities all the time? What does the body do in that circumstance? Um, and again, like I'm not. The more I've been involved with the experience that I try to write about, the better I write about it naturally. But I don't necessarily think that that means that one has to explicitly write only about what one has experienced. In the way of, I've been a window washer. Does that mean I have to write about window washing all the time? Like, especially obviously fielding pieces that are built in worlds that don't exist. Uh, Writing fiction and writing in general is a really good opportunity to lie and to write yourself as something that you aren't, and to try to be that for a while by using a very small portion of yourself to do that. But still, you are you need to leverage uh, your ability to magnify and to see something through allegorically, so that you can not just write a diary or not just write your life down. Not to say that it's not a good thing to write down your life, but I don't know. You can write anything, and that's the cool part about it. I think the hard part is that you sit down to write anything and you end up feeling like you just wrote something, and that something is very small compared to what you wanted to write, and the relationship between those two things becomes a crippling belief that you're unable to do what you want, and if that weighs down on you enough, you stop doing what eventually would be a really cool thing, um, which is where I put mechanisms into place and so forth. But let's listen to young Eric talk about this instead.
Is this your first published piece of work? Why did you publish this? Do you bite your tongue at me?
I have no idea what that last question meant.
This is not my first published piece of work. I have been published maybe 6 times, 7 times. Short stories, poetry, all very juvenile, very driven by a need for people to hear me, largely
Also not true.
unrecognized. I find it all.
Real quick, I'm throwing myself under the bus here, but every piece that I wrote that's already published, I loved and still love. Like I can go back and live in ELC, the Universal Flood, in Slice of Life, in The Gouger. I've only really published short stories and a few poems, but I'm still very proud of every piece that exists. And in some ways, reading them now, they exceed me. And I'm not sure quite how to get back into those worlds. Um, so disregarding them as juvenile is just my way of saying, like, I promise to be serious about this one. But the truth is I've been serious about writing ever since I started.
Still readable, and it's on the internet.
I love that dog too. Gretel?
What more do you want on that?
She was a dog sit.
Why? Why did I publish this, and why did I publish anything? It's in an interest for conversation. It's to drive a dialogue between myself and others.
Same thing.
It's to prove in some way that I am a unique series of experiences and ideas that are not you. I'm interested in, from the act of writing, what comes of it. I've become more and more fascinated with the fact that when I send a letter to someone, there is a recursive moment wherein they send me something back. I did find in these early publications that there was no real response outside of, even if the piece was accepted, which is rare, as anyone who's writing and submitting knows. Even if that were the case, I would still hear nothing back in the way of nutritive response. I never felt like suddenly I was
All right, a real quick sync up again and sync. All right, I think that should do. I screwed up and I only have 20 minutes of recording time on each uh, video block, so excuse the brief interruption, but it may not even seem like an interruption to you. I just lost a bunch of time.
It's in an interest for conversation. It's to drive a dialogue between myself and others. It's to prove in some way that I am a unique series of experiences and ideas uh, that are not you. I'm interested in, from the act of writing, what comes of it. I've become more and more fascinated with the fact that when I send a letter to someone, there is a recursive moment wherein they send me something back. I did find in these early publications that there was no real response outside of even if the piece was accepted, which is rare, as anyone who's writing and submitting knows. Even if that were the case, I would still hear nothing back in the way of nutritive response. I never felt like suddenly I was getting something, and that frustration has often been one of the preventative things that makes it so that I don't write. And it's only been through finding
It's
a certain
arguable.
sense of self-engineering or self-fueling that I feel ready to actually release something that could yet still go quietly into that good night.
Hmm.
And as to the tongue biting bit, I don't bite my tongue very frequently. I do bite my cheeks a lot, but I think that's the caffeine. Question 4 and
I
final.
don't do that anymore. I also don't bite my cheeks all that much. But regarding self-engineering and self-fueling and conversation, I think I still stand by all that. Like there's, um, I don't know if that's why write at all, but um, why publish maybe. Uh, there's an ongoing discussion that I have with Joseph about the fact that writing feels like to me like it has a um, it's intended as a means of communication, and it doesn't have to be communicating with a person. It can be communicating with yourself further down the line. It can be communicating with something that you don't understand, but I just don't think that it's an entirely internal process. I don't think he does either. But I think that a lot of the business conversation around writing particularly has to do with, who's your audience? How do you give your audience what they need, which is such a commercialist attitude, and it's it's legitimate in a lot of circumstances. Like if you're trying to get something to somebody and you want them to have it, then you want them to have it. There's nothing wrong with that. I think writers get torn up inside about whether or not they are or whether or not they owe something to somebody outside of the story that they're writing, um, and it not just story, right, but poem or whatever. And I think there is an opportunity in writing for an experience that builds its own expectations, builds its own criteria for success, and thus when you work on it, if you start to cater to somebody who will be listening to it, whether it's Joseph as an editor, your mom as a reader, the lover that you wrote it for as a poem, the 10,000 people screaming fans that you imagine will turn it into a movie and make you billions. When that starts to creep into your writerly process, it makes it so that things become hollow and you start trying to copy what you imagine those people will want rather than what's actually being generated. And I think there is something that is still entirely incomprehensible about what it means to try to translate whatever we are as people into syllables and symbols. We don't really know what's happening. We don't understand our whole body. We can't even feel our whole body half the time. Um, you know, it's a vague statement, but you don't feel your heart beating, same as you don't feel your bacteria or the bacteria in your stomach doing what they're doing. And if you try to imagine that, like, you can completely understand what an idea is, like, I will challenge you again and again to actually come to me with an explanation of some, it's just well beyond the capacity for the brain to understand what the brain is. Um, and so writing is an opportunity to say, like, well, whatever it makes, that's its first rule. And then if you answer to that first rule with whatever you write secondarily, and stay attuned to that, then you end up creating things that you never imagined, that you hadn't imagined, right? You literally come in pace with the process of your imagination to the point where you're writing out a dream as it's happening. And it doesn't happen and stay for long, but it's a really amazing feeling, that I'm sure people feel in a lot of different fields. But writing is one of those rare opportunities to do it again and again and do it deliberately, chase it, have permission to look for it inside yourself. And it's not always there, but that's why I keep going back. That's for sure.
Final is, what the fuck are you doing in Seattle? Literally, I am sitting, I'm taking care of dogs, I am living with a wonderful woman named Alyssa.
Hell yeah.
I eat, sleep, occasionally get work. I do graphic design. I edit books. I go to a coffee shop called Broadcast Coffee Roasters, where I sit in the mornings and write for about 2 to 3 hours. I read. I try to say hello to everyone who I meet on the streets. Maybe not a hello anymore. Seattle is not the Midwest, is not anywhere where people are actively
Little edit
trying
there.
to engage in any
And tried to
capacity. They
explain
do.
a
I
city.
shouldn't say that. It's not a
Ain't gonna
lack of
happen.
active engagement. They are willing to say something or do something, but it's more a gestural hello that's appreciated here on the West Coast. So I would say I'm trying to build friendships through silence in Seattle.
On my first trip through this, I made fun of myself for saying all this bullshit. And for now, I'll just say, what a bunch of bullshit, and move on.
The next set of questions comes from Grant in New York. He asks me, question one, what took you so damn long? I would say two factors, Grant. One is fear.
I'm really young for a writer. I mean, I'm not really young for a writer, but, a lot of people are, it's an old man's activity. It's an old person's activity.
The other is an itch for surprise. The fear is, I believe, anyone's fear who wants to produce something. I think that we are worried about being humiliated. I think that we look at the things that we make and realize that they don't satisfy the notion of a whole as we expected. We're creatures of infinite imagination inside of our bodily shell, and yet what's produced out of us is so not that. It's not entire. And I think that until I felt a sense of completion in even a short story or a poem, how could I really draw enough breath to produce something that long? Um,
Saggy face. Yeah, I mean, I just kind of went over this. Looks like I still feel the way. I will say that, I have significantly more forgiveness for an incomplete thing than I did before. Though still the aim is always to make something that has its own heart and has its own musculature and everything about it can continue to be itself after you've left it.
I think UGO has been a story for me that's been about rewriting and rewriting, not unlike several other pieces I've worked on. But because it's that first book, it has so much personal pressure to be right. And no matter how many people tell you, dismiss that notion, go out there, be courageous, you're young, you'll produce again, baba. There's no real way to counter that except through eventually finding the solution in self. And that took me until I was 31.
35?
Or maybe it has nothing to do with age. It might be a series of experiences and a series of revelations. For the longest time, when people asked me what this book was about, all I could say was the character's name over and over again. Now I understand it, as all books, as something that's unique to my efforts at
No, I'm
understanding where
recording
I came from.
my UGO
And I don't
video
necessarily think I understood that, and still may not.
off screen.
But at least I feel now I can try to attack one
Yeah,
element
you start right in front of the camera.
who I am and where I'm from. Question 2.
A little bit, but you'll be blurry.
You once compared your writing to EDM, electro dance music, for those who don't know. I remember it vividly. I do not. Maybe 7 years or so ago. What is it now? There's 3 artists who I really would touch home with. One is Chopin, who I'm not up on my
These are not. These are just artists that
in the
I was listening to at the time.
explorations I've done in times of desperate need for something that settles me, Chopin is, he's plucky, he's somewhat brutal, he's easygoing.
I don't know what that means. Somewhat brutal. Chopin's not somewhat brutal.
What he does, I love listening to that, and I'm sure that the tones of his music have sort of settled like genealogy into me. The second would be
making stuff up.
who, if I don't know, these ladies have popped out of nowhere for me, and I'm not actively listening to them, but I do when I write, and I did when I wrote UGO. I put this on every morning, and it's very good and easy for me to put on a soundtrack that really has stuff that I can return to, so that I kind of settle back into the beat, and I don't think
this is Eric trying to be a feminist
too much. I'm not trying to listen to the music to understand the words, to understand the gestalt of the times. I just want something that, like a mantra, kind of pushes me back into this space. And Haim has something very down to earth, very feminine power, very female forward.
There it is. See,
and just boot stomp. You know, you need that kind of crunch to feel like when you hit a rhythm that it matches whatever you're doing. Thirdly, Anderson .Paak. He is recent, hot, way sexier than I could ever be, writing wise, but his sense of simple motion, but also somewhat nuanced, kind of diving through different themes, is spectacular. I love the guy. I think he's creative. I think he's incredibly flamboyant in a very positive way. I think he's optimistic more than anything else. And if there is one thing that I could keep wrapping around my writing, it would be a huge Anderson .Paak jacket of optimism.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll agree with the optimism count. Like, if I could draw anything out of it, there is something very sunny about his work, but I don't think that my writing is like stunningly optimistic by any stretch of the imagination. I think some of my characters are optimistic and there's a playfulness, but I don't, there's none of the sensuality. In fact, I'm incredibly prude, writing wise, maybe life wise. Anyway, the feminism stuff, I think if there's anything in Haim that came through, or that like I would compare or equate, it's like a down hominess, or a like a pastoral version. You know, they seem like girls who they just finished high school up. I mean, they didn't just finish high school, but you know, they rolled out of high school as a band, and they probably go home for good dinners and all that sort of stuff, which, you know, they're not writing from the inner city or from a foreign country or on the seas or anything. And then Chopin, like, that's just a dream, right? Making something that good. I don't know if you can. I don't know what I'd compare my um, writing to music wise. Uh, like it's uh, yeah, I don't know. It has some of the weirdness of like Ween in it, and like it's weird mythologies that try and make themselves up. Um, I my dream is some Bruce Springsteen is in there, but that may not be true. I think it's a little too like there's not a good enough story to be Bruce Springsteen. As far as its like the simplicity and heart wrenchingness of it. Um, uh, I don't know, man. I wish I could write like Future Islands. If I could write stories like Future Islands, like there's a lot of weirdness to um, his or their music, but still this sort of a little bit elevated, right? Like a little bit of that. You get a sense that there's a romantic or like a Victorian quality or like this, um, uh, like I don't know, a non-realist perspective. Um, but I don't know. Music's difficult. I think music is more what you end up listening to while you're writing, more so than trying to imitate. Though I definitely think that there is quite a bit of value in um, trying to use a song or a style of music as a model for thinking about writing and then working off of that.
Grant asking another question from New York. Did you spell check UGO? Just checking before you get a tattoo.
I have to
And
take a break in
tattoo
a
has
few
been
moments because
cleverly
the
misspelled
camera runs out of
TATTU.
juice. So
A knowing reference to perhaps one of the grander literary mistakes of my life, in which on the tattoo on my back that I had made at 18 years old, the phrasing is "Mon cœur c'est vrai est un éléphant." My heart it's true as an elephant. When I put down un éléphant,
I'm
it
not
was
even saying that
discovered
right.
fairly shortly thereafter that I had misspelled completely the gender of the elephant. I had made the elephant itself uh, feminine, and the pronoun beforehand, it's not a pronoun, but masculine.
It makes that up too.
An unfortunate error discovered by my mother who taught me French. Uh, have I spell checked Ugo? No.
No, I hadn't at the time, but I did when I finished, and it actually cost me $8 a page to correct errors after the proof was done. I found spelling errors on like 130 different pages or some baloney like that. They cut me a deal and just rebuilt the file from scratch, but I copy edited it and my cousin Kate said, "Don't pay somebody to copy edit your work if you're a good copy editor," and I think I stand by that. So far, there have only been a couple errors that have been found, and the cost of somebody going through and forking through it is pretty high. But nonetheless, it is a monumental undertaking to actually look through something that you've written and find the problems. And unfortunately, because I use weird words and uh, a program without any spell check capability, it's next to impossible to use the robots to do it.
Grant's final question. Are you still a bit of a gambler? I think you still owe me a visit. Again, another reference in question. After trouncing Grant thoroughly in backgammon, I forget how many games
Like
in a
7
row,
games in a row.
in a growing series of double or nothings, it was established that I would visit him in New York if I lost the game that we played finally.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me, I don't know if you have read Eric the Viking, but it was a bit of the chess
All right.
game
10 seconds.
between Eric the
1342. Pausing. All right, we'll sync these up with a 19 more minutes to go.
The Viking in death. Because in that moment, and this happens to me a lot in competitive settings, in that moment where it was all on the edge, my body completely failed me, my mental faculties failed me, all my luck failed me. It was as though I was making deliberately wrong moves and throwing the game. Or maybe I just have this thing about balancing it out. I don't
Nah,
like to win again and
boy, you
again.
lost that game.
Am I still a gambler? I've never really been a gambler.
True.
Do I
Not a
still
gambler.
owe you a
Conservative, very
visit?
conservative.
Yes. And I think in relation to this Kickstarter, if I can reach my first stretch goal, I'll start the book tour in New York.
Quick pause. Book tour is coming after Korea. I'll take the remaining books with me, put them in the back of the car, and drive them to New York. It may start on the West Coast just because I'll need to sell the books in order to get where you are, Grant. But yeah, I've got some addresses written down, and we'll set some shit up and sell those remaining books and hang out.
All right. The following questions come from my oldest friend, Mr. Will Mitchell, in
Alyssa wandering around in the background, same as she's wandering around in the foreground now.
Colorado. Question number 1 from the man is, in your view, is being a writer in the digital age substantially different than before the advent of computers? If so, how? If not, why not? Being a writer is the same, I think, as it has always been, the act of capital W writing. The professional landscape has changed somewhat. It's also just relative to the number of people. There are more people, thus there are more writers. If there are more writers, there are more publishers. Obviously, I think one of the inferences is that
Is that the right word?
publication is very easy. One can simply send something to Facebook. Voila, you are a published writer. You can get yourself on Medium. You can self-publish your own hardback book. Being
Okay.
a writer, though,
Okay.
hasn't really changed. Getting published has changed, as has my notion of what getting published actually is. The idea of getting published as a writer for me has changed from something of having someone else authenticate what I am doing and admitting that I am level 3 writer
Mm-hmm.
to, do I have enough people in my life that would be willing to read this text and respond to it and say,
Nah, hold on. I lost track of my thought. I got too complicated in my my inceiving. Um, my idea of publishing didn't change from like someone validating my writing to not like submitting to a journal or getting it in on Penguin's lists or whatever. In fact, I don't think I necessarily ever knew what that was. It's just now the difference is I am glad when I share it with somebody who I know reads it, and the difference between an anonymous reader and a reader who I know and can respond to me is humongous, and it changed everything because it meant that I was no longer seeking an associated fame and an uncalculatable like something. I was no longer looking to people I didn't know and to a system that I didn't know. It was the same as when you are in a room with 100 people, uh, picking a spot in the room and just starting to talk about something versus finding a friend or finding somebody who you could relate to and chatting them up and then sharing your ideas and seeing what sort of circle or group gathered from there. Um, Under the same metaphor, it means you're not always in a room immediately sharing your ideas, the ones that you really think are important. It's a transition from feeling like you're the one who has something to say to being engaged in a relationship with the people around you and with the ideas that already exist around you and responding to them foremost or firstly. And then if something's generated by the two of those things engaging, if there's some sort of synthesis that creates something new, that's where you have something to share, and where down the road somebody like me picks up your book and says, wow, this person really came up with something. You know, it's so easy to look at books that we read, classics or people you've heard recommended or respected things, and think, ah, well, this person started out under the impression that they were going to add something new to the conversation, started out on a blank page, just making something new. And the act of writing, of publishing specifically for me, has become far more about what can I grab that exists in the world now and respond to it. Um, and in that process, find something new in myself, possibly, or just, reiterate something that was important that somebody else said in a new way so that somebody else could hear it and pass it along, so that on down the line, baby.
I understand these ideas. These ideas settled with me. I would share these ideas if possible. Now I feel that that's the case. But you're not asking how I'm growing as a writer. You're asking about whether it's changed. And I think the same problems still exist. The same fears still exist. The same obstacles still exist. We're writing about scenery. We're writing about the change in scenery. We're trying to understand our world. And the way a writer does that is through words. Do you wear long socks or short socks?
Just really briefly, sorry, I'm going to keep interrupting myself. I don't necessarily, I think also my idea of what a writer as occupation is very different than once upon a time. Being a writer should be extracted from like the structure of being a carpenter, or being an engineer, or being a caretaker. Maybe I'm wrong on this. That's entirely plausible, but like I don't necessarily and this goes back to the whole idea of like, is writing for other people or is writing for you? And I don't want to say that I don't love sharing my writing or involving it, but when I set out to do it, I'm not setting out to do it under the impression that I'm solving somebody else's problems for them. Whereas an engineer is saying, and maybe they're solving their own problems, if they feel like they want to get from point A to point B, and man, they wish there was a faster way of doing that, and they build themselves a, horse-drawn carriage, then sure, they're solving their own problems, and then they end up sharing it. So maybe it's not removed from those other occupations so much as, like, for me, I've had to turn away from the idea of, well, basically, is it a mindset? Is it a way that I try and solve the problems inside of myself? Some people see problems in the way people are treated, and they decide to care for them, and they keep caring for them, and then they realize that other people would pay them to care for them because they care for people so well. Some people, solve problems of motion very well. Some people, but these are reflected in the fact that these people see these problems first, and they see these problems, and so they practice in their own mind or in their, off time, or just in like how they move around the world. A person who, is constantly thinking about or feeling their physical body as something that's deteriorating and so deserves a bunch of exercise and, constant like assessment of its angles and what it's doing at this point in time and its flexibility, might quickly become a, physical trainer or whatever, because they find that state native, and they, move towards it. There is a lot to say for receiving good feedback early on about the way that you do something and what that ends up doing as far as its shaping of your future, which is why it's so important to continue to encourage anyone who you see around you, particularly young people, when they're doing good things, because it's those sort of comments that will lift them into their future. Whereas if somebody gets told that they're good for nothing and so forth, as many people are, unfortunately, it's often true that they'll lose track of their ability to dream themselves into a state of anything, and they'll instead, you know, they'll work for somebody else's dream, or they'll imagine that they're not worth anything and that they should just pay attention to how much money they can get or whatever. And then things become, in my opinion, just discordant inside the body, inside the self. And unfortunately, a lot of times that causes a lot of huge issues. Um, anyway, that's all to say that writing for me has always been my way of solving the problems that I read, or that I see, or recreating the problems that I see, and mimicking and imitating. And oh, does this work? Does this make this happen? Um, and it's like a weird little alchemy, weird version of alchemy. This is
I
going to be
wear
so
long
fucking long.
socks.
I'm sorry, but maybe you'll enjoy
Short
it.
socks are invisible deliberately, probably because your shoes are cool or because your calves and ankles look good. Long socks are cool because there's a lot more room for pattern.
Yeah, baby. I still only wear
My
long
grandma
socks.
gave me my socks. They're excellent socks. My girlfriend gives me socks. I want to show those off. My shoes, oh, I don't have that many pairs of shoes.
Nope.
Question 3. What?
Same pair of shoes still as this day. My brother gave me a pair of Chacos. I've resold them multiple times, and I have restrapped them once, and they are the best pair of shoes that I've ever owned. And they are usable in so many different conditions, and I would invest in that company, and I would promote them if they would just kindly send me another pair. That'd be sweet, because I fear these ones are going to get worn through, and I don't need another pair. Chacos are awesome. Buy a pair of Chacos. Seattle, there's a pretty popular style. I don't know if I got it in Seattle. I think I got it beforehand, but I've been wearing my socks with my sandals, and I'm all right with it. Like, so all right with it.
Do you most have to overcome in your own writing? And I think I addressed fear already. But I would say that one of the biggest things as a writer of any sort, trying to understand, is am I approaching a story that's worth telling? And I've been hitting this nail on the head quite a few times in my introductory paragraphs recently as I set out to write short stories. Is okay, I know how this ends. Is it worth writing? I know how this guy dies. Is it worth writing? Is my story any more important than another person's story? Is it worth writing? That sense of potential nothingness and nihilism is so numbing that you will sit there with that thought kind of caving in the back of your skull.
I don't think that nihilism is really what does it for me, or did it for me at this time. Like, I've always felt fairly confident that writing was important to me. I think I'm trying to speak to somebody who has that problem. Could be wrong,
Like
but
having this somewhat fun story, and I think you just have to ask yourself at that point is, if I were sitting in a room with several other people and it were silent and someone brought up something that triggered my memory, would I tell this story? And could I make it enjoyable? Because stories, frankly, are the way we learn, the way we pass along information, and a great way of relating laterally through a lot of different topics. Stories are the learning process. They're the human method of transmission. And so that degree of buoyancy, when I find that, allows me to overcome what is really the most difficult thing for me, which is, do I matter?
oh man, wow. Wow. Like, it could have all been consolidated into that last line, but boy wants to spill his beans, doesn't he? Um I don't I don't know. I don't know if I agree with this kid. Like, I respect the opinion, um but I just don't think I've ever had a problem writing. I think the problem that I've always had is with revision, and is with that's it. It's with revision, right? It's going back. That's the hardest part of writing, period. You write something real easy, just write it down, just start scribbling, and you'll write something. And then you look at it and you're like, well, that's a thing. And then you have to say, am I going to make that thing something else, or am I going to make that thing any better? And that's where I've always been like, well, it can't be made better. And that's just ego. That's just uh, flat out. It's like, well, I was, whether early on it was like, oh, I can't get back into the creative spirit that made this thing, or, well, no, people don't understand it, and it's already a thing, um, and now I'm not saying that it's gone. Like every piece of writing, it feels like the same damn process where it's put it down once, say like, the best I've ever written, um, and then over time have some reckoning with it that says like, well, it still needs work. And I don't know what the thing is that identifies when a thing needs work. That's the difficult um, and somewhat intangible part, is somehow inside you read something and you're like, why doesn't this feel right? And that is so indefinable and removed of any sort of equation or arithmetic, uh, that really the only process is how much patience do you have with yourself to go through the same thing over and over again, reading it and trying to stay fresh. Um, and there's been a lot of times where I have none. I have no patience and I just write it once. There's been some times where I have, in the case of UGO, had to find ways to prop up my patience by saying like, arbitrarily, oh, you'll do this one more time, or oh, folks have paid you to do this, so you will do this even if you don't feel like it needs it. Um, and on a day-to-day basis though, like writing proper is quite simple. It's just sitting down with a piece of paper out and imagining that whatever you think next is worth writing down. And that's where, do I matter comes up, because a lot of times, or does this matter, right? Like, does this matter to sit down and write these things down because the things seem trivial? I remember reading my journals when I was a kid and being like, my God, what a bunch of, you go back and look at something 2 years old like this and you're like, why did I even sit down and record this? And don't get me wrong, I think some of the stuff that this fellow is saying is legitimate and stands. The approach is different, but I'm sure that in 3 years, when I look at this video and look at myself answering and all mopey and snot nosed, um, that'll feel the same way. And I think that that's maybe growth, or maybe it's just watching the body transition or watching the self transition through time. Now I've started doing exactly what he's doing, so I'm just going to let him go.
Which berry is the best, says Will? Straw, rasp, or chuck? And I think I find with all these sort of multiple choice
God damn,
questions,
that's
a
still
certain
good, Will.
want to wit them out. As in, is there a solution that is not one of the three presented? But working within the boundaries, I would say that my brother and I used to go get
Oh yeah.
Mr. Misty Freeze Blue Raspberry from Dairy Queen in Longmont, Colorado. Maybe 5 to 10 times a summer.
No,
and my dad
3 times a summer.
showed us how delicious those things were.
It's not real fruit.
Will's next question is: if
By the way, I've been eating raspberries. I've been eating raspberries on half baked, on Ben and Jerry's half baked, and that is like combo of the century. My mom also has fresh blackberries, and she's been making a lot of shrubs, which I'd never heard of, but are like the adult syrup. And I feel like there's a world of creation possibility in shrubs plus ice cream, or I don't know. Obviously, people do shrubs in cocktails, but I don't know. There's the whole like matcha tea movement and all these like bottled high end bottled drinks could learn something from shrubs and probably mass produce it to terrible environmental. Anyway,
I overheard you say this is trash, what would you most likely be talking about? Game of
Game of
Thrones season 6
Thrones. Yeah,
dialogue.
man, that shit was
His next question
bad.
is: where
Game of Thrones was really bad, as was just recently watched. Oh shit. I'll be right back. All right, we're recording again entirely. Got another 19 minutes. So I was saying Game of Thrones is trash or was trash, and um, I think there's a lot of good reason for that. But we just watched Lovecraft Country. Sorry, guys, but I just couldn't get on board with that last episode. And I know I'm just like shaming HBO series in this question, and there's a lot more important things to shame, but just like it was like one thing after another that just didn't work in it. And I tried to prop myself up to keep watching it. In fact, I did prop myself up to watch most of it, but I didn't like it. Uh, there's a lot of other things that I'd rather be involved with and watch. Anyway, sorry. So sorry.
Where do you come down on the Oxford comma? His next question is, how often is too often to start a sentence with the word and? It's a
Oh,
really
I
good
hate my
question, I
answer to this
thought,
question. God
because
damn it. There's Bowie. Big Bowie.
there's probably a legitimate answer. Of course, you could do it as many times as
No.
you wanted if you felt sort of
Do I talk about Cormac McCarthy is all I remember. That dude uses and so well. So well.
neutral on the idea of actually trying to convey a real person's voice. But I find that when you start a sentence with and in conversation, that you tend to be peaking higher and higher. And if you were to keep saying it, you would rise out of the actual vocal range. So,
You'd also run out of breath is what you do.
for instance, I was eating burgers the other day,
Of course I have to use this
and I
fucking voice.
also had toast, and then I saw, and then, etc. So you would see how that would rise. I would say
No,
like
Eric.
four
No,
of
no, no,
those.
no, 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 no. No. People don't talk like this. People don't keep saying and over and over again. But it is a cool way to write a sentence. It especially it's particularly poetic in a certain way. I don't know. I think you can get away with like four or five of them. Again, I think Cormac McCarthy does way more than that, but uh, I think it's a cool way to avoid that comma thing where you that like everybody loves to do in every essay they've ever written, and they teach you how to do like when you make a list, it's juice, comma, jam, comma, and jelly. But juice and jam and jelly is just as cool, especially if he had juice and jam and jelly and squirt, which who drinks squirt anymore? And he had more than that on the table. It's a cool way to get this feeling of like breathlessness in a sentence, and you're permitted certain. There's a little bit more room to move in the written word as far as how much breath somebody has in their mind, because people will take a break even if you with their like they'll take a mental pause even if you don't provide them punctuation, which to me is um, where I usually find grammatical error, because I think people should indicate where pause should be taken, but there's a lot of ways to read, and it gets harder and harder every day to say there's one way to write.
Is probably where I'd cap myself off at, because I'd start rising to that point that really sounds
What did
like
I say?
shit.
6? I
Will's next
forget. Oh well.
question: do you write more for yourself or for others?
Hmm.
I think I do most everything more for others.
No,
And
bro. No, no, no. It has been pointed out to me again and again, and I think I stand by it, that like when I sit down to write a letter to somebody, I eventually fall in love with them, but initially I'm writing because I need to write myself. Like I have to solve whatever's unsolved in me, and I don't even know what that thing is. I don't know if it's I don't know what it is. I some days it's not a problem. I'm not sitting here with all these issues in my mind that, need constant locking, but by the time I'm done writing something, I always feel better. And um somewhere in the middle of that, I'll recognize that I am leveraging my idea of who somebody else is in order to get there. And again, I'm thinking of letters because I think that the foundation of my writing is the letter form. I think that if I write a novel, it's a long letter, with the dear whoever removed. But in the case of letter writing, I think it's always, you know, dear whoever, you know, sitting here thinking about you today. And in that moment, I'm just thinking I have to write this person. But I rarely am thinking this person needs to hear from me because they don't. You know, I have no idea what's going on in their life. Um, that doesn't mean that I don't try to do things for other people, but writing specifically is just something that I've figured out is what makes me feel good. It makes me feel so damn good. And I would be really, really lying, as was the case here, to say that I do it to make other people feel really good. You know, like I'm more than happy to find out that my writing did make somebody feel good, but that is a byproduct of the fact that I myself made myself feel good. Sorry, old Eric or new Eric or young Eric or whatever.
And I'm learning now how to draw boundaries for myself. He asks, why is it so hard to convey sarcasm in a text message? It's not difficult. You need to pay attention to your italics
Oh, so prescriptive, Eric.
and be pretty prescient about
There's no italics in text message.
how the timing is on when the person is receiving it. You'll never get a response, the response that you'd hope from sarcasm, which is
Also wrong.
a return of sarcasm, because what else?
I wish Will hadn't asked me this question.
That? But I do think that generally, let's shift from sarcasm to sincerity and understand that real humor is truth. Truth by understatement or truth at all, but truth, and a sincere truth, is always more appreciated than the funniest wit.
I mean, this is true, right? I do believe that I want to be authentic. I just got way too patronizing. I got like, and this was, I still do, but what I'm reminded of is when Will and I were growing up, you know, from about the age of 17 when we met, or 16 when we met, to about the age of 24, we were as sarcastic as we possibly could be in so many circumstances. And it was really damaging. It was really funny at times, but it comes at an expense. And it's been a lot of time and work to try to erase a lot of that sarcasm out of myself. And I still have times where I get careless and I realize I'm just mocking somebody and not listening to them. It's not all mocking. It's just, you know, like, I don't know, the world is full of ironies and it's easy to point them out. And I think like raw sarcasm in its, what I would say its purest form, can still be really funny. But it's sort of, I don't know, it's obvious, and it can be very painful to whoever's listening or whoever is the butt of the joke or whatever. And I don't know. It's not a it's I don't know. You got to have the right people, and especially in regards to text message. Like I still keep up with Matt, and most of what we do is sarcastic in some way. Kind of. It's more playful than sarcastic, but sometimes it's sarcastic. I don't know. It's just a young form of humor.
My final set of questions come from Matt in New Jersey.
There's Matt.
Question number one. If you could be a pencil or an eraser and only one of them, which would you prefer to be?
Pencil or eraser?
I want to be this Pentel 0.5 millimeter pencil I had.
It was a Mad Lib. Sorry.
In third or fourth grade, when I first drew Vegeta from a trading card that Chisung Cow gave me.
Hell yeah.
I used whiteout on the little rubber grasp.
Overpronouncing
in order to make sure that everybody knew it was mine. And it had the perfect weight to where my little hand could do these awesome little shades. It had a tiny eraser, really small. And if I can beg the question giver's leniency, I think, yes, I would want to be a pencil, but I would want to marry an eraser.
Oh my, how cute. That was so for Alyssa. Maybe. I don't know what that was for. I think it's a legitimate question. Maybe. Would I rather be a pencil or an eraser? I really do like those little erasers that are on the mechanical pencils that roll out. And I don't like number 2 pencils very much. I've become more fond of carpenter's pencils, with their, you know, you have to cut them with an X-Acto knife, and I learned recently how to really make one very sharp from a guy named Mike Burnham. Um, but man, to be a pencil or an eraser is. Do you want to remove or do you want to add? Ugh. No, sorry, Matt. Unanswerable
Is
question.
which is faster, your hand or your brain?
Hmm.
My brain is a Ferrari.
Ugh.
My hand is a bicycle. The Ferrari has a tendency to stall out a lot, whereas the bicycle can always kind of be brought to bear on exercise.
Hmm. Not a terrible answer to the question, but I don't like Ferraris, so I like balk at even hearing that word. I really don't. I've never wanted one. I've never been in one. I've never found them sleek or anything. They're just, I don't know. I wish I'd used something else.
My mouth is probably slower than both. If you were a mosquito that sucked on talent instead of blood, which writer would you suck off first?
I think I had a hard time keeping a straight face there. It was a good
Teen
joke,
Wolf.
Matt.
Does misuse of the word literal make you react viscerally?
Yes.
I
Ugh.
think Matt's referring here to moments where I literally had a heart attack.
Yeah.
Viscerally depends. Viscerally, would imagine has a series of like facial gestures, like
Eric.
just a general sense of revulsion. I think it tends to bring me to a point of truth. I want to simply say that's not true. And the question is,
It's true.
ah,
I don't say it
the
like that.
interruption probably hurts someone's feelings, and usually that person is on a steamroller, so I won't stop them. I think I'm more bothered by litter than literally.
Oh, cute, 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 cute.
Matt's next question is: do you prefer to prepare before speaking in front of people, or is off the cuff your preferred speaking style? It's been proven by this video that off the cuff is all for me. I
Which is false, true too, because I actually wrote my answers to this, and they were really bad. Well, they weren't really bad; they were decent answers written. But in order to speak off the cuff, I had to write everything down. I did this whole video off the cuff, and I think it's probably better than if I'd written it down. But I don't know what I would have done. Oh well, you know what? I did everybody's weddings and everything like that, and I think if I had to do it with an audience, I would rather read something that I wrote. And if I'm okay just like spitballing, not worried about what you're thinking right now because you're not here, but I love you. I'm super grateful that you'd sit here for an hour and 50 minutes and watch this video. But right now, I just doing it. Um, the it comes from Nabokov though. Nabokov never gave interviews uh, improv. He always wrote everything, and that dude was a control freak, but he was also an amazing writer. And I'm not saying when I say came from, I believe what he said. It really is. It is amazing if you sit and write a piece that is designed to be read aloud and you read it to yourself and you hear yourself read it by using like a good microphone and a pair of headphones, or you do it to a mirror or whatever. It is amazing how different it is for me. And maybe this isn't for everybody. Some people are very good at just coming up with stuff. But how much of a point you can make and how beautiful it can sound compared to what it sounds like if you just wing it. I've watched too many of these wedding speeches at wherever, and it's just like somebody gets up there with the best of intentions, and then they realize that they're in front of people and they have nothing to stand on. And some people manage to pull it off. I've not seen many, but I think that the best orators have always taken something up with them that they can work with, because otherwise uh, you can be funny on and you can make good points, but you can also get caught with your pants down pretty hard in general. That's a great statement. Good job, Eric.
wrote out all the answers to these questions, and none of the answers did I give you in return.
Look at that cute ass
The
little
seventh
dog. Oh
question
my
is
god.
the H in UGO not only
Fucking
silent but
Gretel.
invisible?
She's a what is she? She's a same as Wednesday. Um fuck. I forgot what kind of dog she is.
His
Oh, H and Ugo. I've had a number of people call him Hugo. Hugo. Um, it's Ugo. Ugo, not Hugo. Not Hugo. Some people spell it with a Y. I don't know why they do that. I think it's my pronunciation. People are saying it weird, but I mean, if I say Ugo, like where does that come from? Anyway,
eighth question is on Will's sock question. What percentage of the time are you wearing socks and
there you
sandals?
go. But look at that fucking dog.
Most of
Ugh.
the time.
They're expensive,
But
which
you
is
could
silly,
also
but
ask the
they're
question,
awesome.
how often do I have to wash my socks relative to other people who wear socks in boots or socks in shoes? And the answer is about 4 or 5 times, 4 or 5 wears I'll get out of a pair of socks, which has reduced my
Right.
laundry load over the course of a year by like 650, $7. Not to mention the amount of socks that I don't go through because we all know that socks somehow actually get swallowed by the dryer. I do want to address some questions that came up out of a video as well. And these are more questions for Chrissy, who's here in Seattle. Um, they're questions that she probably asked herself and I think are worth asking everyone, which is, who are you and what do you want? It makes me think of that what's her face? Meredith. I always assume it's Alanis Morissette, but I'm a bitch, I'm a lover, I'm a chap, right? I have that list of things for you. I am who I am as a categorical person.
Huh.
But I think what I am and who I am right now ties into what I want, which is I'm a storyteller. I have managed to squeeze whatever series of events have happened in my life down into a fictional story about another boy man. And I want to share that with you. I don't guarantee that you'll read it the same way that I wrote it, but I'm interested in what the possibility is in sharing it, what it can form amongst the people who I care about. And I'm most interested right now in giving back to the people who have supported me as much as they have in this early stage of my career, which has involved a lot of charity and a lot of free time to think and a lot of incredibly supportive suggestions, comments, edits, critiques, reads, and feedings that have kept me going and given me the wing room to develop the thoughts that I've developed in hopes that they'll actually carry you, myself, and other people we haven't met yet forward.
Not bad, baby. Not bad. I mean, that closing statement was something. It still holds true. Thank you very much for letting me do this. Thank you very much for making this possible. Um, it it really was a wild ride and a long one, and I feel 100% capable of doing it on my own now. I'll probably still ask you to help me pay for the future ones, but at the very least, you've given me the time to actually figure out how to do it properly. Um, and uh, I'm yeah, it's been really fucking good. So, cheers, everybody. Thanks so much. If you don't have a copy of the book, it's available on my website, but hopefully you find one in a used bookstore someday. That's the dream. Hopefully it's my used bookstore that you stop by in Sitka, Alaska, when I'm doddering and Alyssa's got her coffee shop and everything. So thanks so much for sticking around for this 2.5 hour long revisitation of young boy Eric. Big love. Peace.